today we're doing a phobia Q&A based upon the questions that you very kindly sent us over our Instagram, Twitter and Facebook.
This is our first Q&A on YouTube, so we're really excited about it. Let's get started.
We've got our daughter Liv here asking us the questions, so here we go.
Okay, so Laura on Instagram says, "Hi, can deep-rooted phobias be cured?"
Wow, we hear this so often, and the fact of the matter is, deep-rooted is a word that we just don't like because it doesn't really exist, does it, Eva?
No. I think people think that a phobia can be deep-rooted because they've had it a long time, but in actuality, there is no such thing as deep-rooted. A phobia is a phobia. It's a protection response against something due to the consequence of a life event at some point where you fell in a fearful state, maybe even sort of scared for your life, and that's how a phobia is created. So the good news is there is no such thing as deep-rooted. All phobias work the same way. They are all addressed in the same way, and hopefully you'll be able to see that.
But we'll just add in a bit to that. Nobody's born with a phobia is the first thing, and the second thing, phobias are created in seconds. So just consider, it doesn't matter how long you've had something, it took seconds to create it. It can actually, in theory, take seconds for it to go as well, so nothing is deep-rooted.
Hope that's helped. Got next question, Liv?
Okay, so Jodie on Instagram says, "How do I get over emetophobia when I've tried everything else?"
Okay, Jodie, that's a great question about emetophobia. It's probably the phobia that we are asked about the most. And it's amazing that a lot of people think that they're the only one. And a lot of people with emetophobia think that their phobia is worse than anybody else's. But we've really seen it through from being bad to horrendously severe, and the good news is that you can be cured of emetophobia. A little bit sometimes more challenging than some phobias, primarily because we've got two types of phobias. You've got a simple phobia, so that might be spiders or a snake, like a single object. The thing with emetophobia, which is a phobia of vomit, that's classed as a complex phobia, and the reason being is because you add other things into it, different situations and eventualities that may be related to vomit. So that might be illness, that might be going into doctor's surgeries, that might be certain types of food, that might be children, that might be hand washing. You might start to have some OCD behaviours. However, you're not born with it, something's happened in your life, and therefore the best way to address emetophobia is two ways, or both actually, two things that you have to do. The first is to try, and this is the most effective, is locating the origin. And when you understand why you created that belief and basically make sense of why you started this phobia off, because a phobia is just a protection. So something orientated around vomiting occurred in your life where either you felt you were in danger, a loved one was in danger, or someone was incredibly embarrassed, and you're protecting yourself from those feelings. So understanding it and then challenging it. What we mean by that, and this is the second part of addressing a phobia, and emetophobia particularly, is looking for evidence as to why what you believe in isn't true, and how actually vomit saves lives. Vomit is our body's first line of defence. Now, we've got a great film here on our YouTube channel. It's about 20 minutes long, probably the longest film we've got on our YouTube channel, but it's absolutely crammed and packed with information.
We've actually had people who've said that they've watched the film and they have overcome their emetophobia just from watching that film. And one thing I'd also like to point out is just change your terminology a little bit, because when you say that you feel like you've tried everything, you haven't, because essentially emetophobia can be cured, and a lot of people in the world are curing emetophobia. So you've only tried everything when you've actually got cured. So you've not actually found one of those people yet who've been able to cure you. But please be reassured that you can overcome emetophobia and you don't have to live with it.
Yeah, we also cover emetophobia in our book, Conquering Anxiety. There's quite a lot about it in there as well. Next question, Liv.
So as well as a lot of questions on emetophobia, we also had a lot of questions on driving phobias. And Mrs. T with a P on Instagram says, "How can I get to drive over Thelwall Viaduct on the M6? I had a panic attack years ago driving on it."
Right, and that's quite a specific thing. And in our experience, whilst you can have a driving phobia, which is usually based upon having an accident, and in that situation, what happens? You have an accident. In that moment, it can take a millisecond. We think, I'm going to die, even if it's only a small bump. But just having that thought, your brain will then protect you from being in that situation again. And in order to do that, it will protect you from the car. And therefore, every time you sit in a car, you will start to feel more and more anxious the more journeys that you have. So that's a common cause of driving phobias. But in this particular case, which is specific to the Thelwall Viaduct, and when it started, then this sounds more like a fear of heights. And how that affects your driving is the fact that, I'm presuming that when you were driving over there was a backlog of traffic and therefore you had to slow down. And when you slow down on a motorway, you tend to become more observant as to what's going on around you. And at that point, you may have noticed that you were very high up. In that moment, your brain goes, I don't like being high up, and your brain's trying to protect you.
If I can just add, you might not have done that consciously. So it
Yes,
might not have been a conscious thought, but it's on you've noticed you're up high from the periphery of your vision, and therefore your protection response kicks in.
And when that happens, your brain goes, okay, I'll protect you, and it gives you adrenaline, and therefore you get these feelings of anxiety. Now, in that moment, because you may not have realised that situation, your brain goes, okay, what's causing this? And again, you blame the car. So now the car is a problem, or motorways specifically are a problem. Whatever your brain blames in that moment in time is what you're going to have a problem with, which is now the Thelwall Viaduct. But to get over this, you've got to deal with a fear of heights, if that's the case.
Yeah, and also with regards to panic, you didn't panic because of the car, you panicked because of something else. So you need to do a little bit more digging. Like Nick said, it's probably a fear of heights. We do have a film on our YouTube about panic. We also have a full podcast on our podcast is called Making a Change. We just devoted a full episode to panic attacks.
Called Pause the Panic.
Fear of having panic and panic attacks. So if you Google Making a Change by the Speakmans, it's a podcast, have a listen to that. That could help as well.
But also consider that even though you had this panic attack in the car, that actually, it might have felt bad in the moment, but the car didn't do anything, and actually nothing went wrong.
Okay, so Lisa Marie on Facebook says, I would like to know how to handle a phobia which relates to a situation, not an object. I can't stay home without another adult in the house alone without ringing my mum for a sleepover or getting drunk, and I'm almost 30.
Wow.
Okay, so that would, obviously you've got a fear potentially of being home alone. And again, all phobias are a learned behaviour.
Who was that off?
Lisa Marie.
Oh,
Okay.
it could have been Macaulay Culkin.
Home Alone.
never know.
But yeah, Lisa Marie, so you've learned that. You've learned that being home alone on some level is danger. Now, what we mean by that you've learned it, that could be that your home was broken into or a friend's home was broken into. So when you're little, a friend's home gets broken into. It could be that you were home alone and left in charge of the house and something went wrong. So it's always best to try and understand why they started, and there's always an origin. Now, you might not realise it, and this is why you have to do a little bit of digging. We do have a film here on our YouTube channel about how to find the origin of your anxiety, how to find the origin of your phobia.
It could also be, and consider it might be separation anxiety.
True.
It might be nothing to do with being at home. It might be if it's separation anxiety, and just as time's gone on, you're spending time at home, whereas when you were younger, you wouldn't have done because you were little.
But the definition of a phobia is an irrational fear. So if you can rationally find an explanation as to why they started, that in itself will make a very, very big difference. So that's step one, and then challenging what actually happened then. So if the house was broken into, the burglar wasn't interested in you, they actually wanted products and goods, and they didn't want to be disturbed. So it's kind of looking for other positive evidence as to why what you currently believe in is untrue, based upon why you've got the phobia in the first place.
And changing your perspective.
So India on Instagram says she's tried hypnotherapy which doesn't seem to have helped. What next?
Okay.
India, I don't know, obviously we don't know what you've tried hypnotherapy for, but essentially a lot of people use sweeping statements like, I've tried hypnotherapy, but have you tried one hypnotist? Have you tried two? Have you tried three? How many people have you tried? Because just like in any occupation, there are people who are good at what they do and people that aren't that great either. And in our experience, a lot of people who practice as hypnotists have actually been interested in hypnosis, they've taken a course, and then they've ended up setting up business. It doesn't mean that they're particularly good at the job. So we don't know, we haven't got the full facts here, but just try someone else, because
And a
hypnosis does work for certain things.
Yeah, but hypnosis works for some people some of the time, and not everybody. And from our experience, and that's just obviously because people, when they come to us, they've probably tried most things. Hypnotherapy isn't always the best therapy for somebody, particularly if you're strong-willed, particularly if you're strong-minded. Because don't forget, the reason that we create a phobia is because we felt that our life was in danger, and we don't want to. I know that might sound silly to you now because it might have been from something that happened in childhood, but don't forget, if your phobia started in childhood, then it's based upon a child's perspective, and it still plays in that same way. So hypnotherapy may not be the way forward. Obviously, like Nick said, any therapy is only as good as the therapist. So it might mean that you need to try someone else, or a different therapy.
Yeah, but what is always a great test, whatever you're going seeing a hypnotherapist for, let's just say, for example, it was a phobia of dogs. What you've got to do is always ring the therapist up and say, can I ask you, have you cured people who've got a phobia of dogs? Right, and if they say yes, great. They might even have testimonials. That's the best thing. But if they haven't, then find someone else, basically.
So Sade on Facebook says, I have a real fear of snakes. I don't even watch them on TV because my fear is so bad. I really don't know where this comes from because no one in my family has a phobia of them, so I haven't learnt this fear through them. When I was younger, I used to shut all the toilet seats in the house because I thought my neighbour's snake would come through the toilet like I'd seen on TV. I really don't know what to do about it, but I would love some advice.
I'll say that's
wow,
so
that's amazing. Isn't it? When you're caught in a phobia, you can't see how obvious it is, how it started.
Yeah,
and so many people say to us, when we say, have you any idea when it started? They will say a sentence, and within the sentence is the answer to when it started.
Just like in your case, Sade, you've actually given us the answer in your question, and that does happen a lot. And so, yeah, your phobia started because of something that you saw on television, in a nutshell. And therefore, what you've got to ask yourself is, how was a snake involved in that? What did a snake do? I mean, did the snake create that film, or was it a director?
I think potentially.
And the neighbour.
Well, I think potentially what's happened is that you found out that the neighbour keeps snakes, and it's not a big deal. But then you see something on the TV that snakes can come through a toilet, and now the neighbour's snake's a big deal because his snake could end up coming through your toilet. Potentially you've put those two things together, or one came before the other. But what we'd like to consider is, when has a snake ever done you any harm?
And did you like your neighbours? And if you did like your neighbours and you thought they were nice people, or that they were fairly sensible, then why would they have a snake if they were dangerous? You see, what you've done is you've actually felt scared and blamed the snake for that fear, as in, that's what I need protecting from. But in actuality, the snake is innocent in this, because a snake's doesn't want to come through the toilet. A snake wants to just be happy somewhere warm and be left alone. And what's really interesting is, because we have snakes and we've worked with them so many times, they actually don't travel very far at all. They just want to be kind of left alone. They want to stay in a very small area, and they don't really move out of it. But understanding the origin, again, realising that it was the film that scared you, not an actual snake, and that snakes, maybe do a survey, ask 50 people how many times they've seen a snake come through the toilet, and I think fairly confidently I could say that it would be absolutely no one, because if this comes back to childhood, in essence you're taking advice from yourself as a little person and from a film that probably wasn't even true, as to how to feel about snakes.
Quite a frightening thought though, isn't it? Sitting down on the toilet and seeing a snake there.
Yeah, but it just never happens, does it?
Well, actually, you can't say it never happens, because
not in this country.
No, that's
UK.
my point. Not in the UK. In certain tropical countries where the drainage system isn't great, potentially a snake can come up the drainage system that way. But I mean, I don't know the odds. You've probably got more chance of winning the lottery.
Yeah, but a snake, they are just quite peaceful. They don't know what a human is. We're just another surface or another object. But they certainly have no animosity or want to hurt you in any way.
So Marie on Facebook says, how do you get over the fear of being out of control and the urge to escape in small places, either lifts, planes, etc.? So,
what name was that?
Marie.
Marie, okay. So, Marie, obviously you have, by the sounds of it, you've got claustrophobia.
Claustrophobia.
And again, very common phobia.
Quite a few claustrophobia questions.
Have we? Okay.
Yeah.
So yeah, claustrophobia, very common. And what's very interesting is that anybody who's got claustrophobia really hasn't ever been trapped. And when we say that to people, we speak to a lot of people at our workshops where we sort of chat with people through the breaks and things, and they come and talk to us. And every time I'll say, but you've never been trapped? And they'll say, well, yes, I was. I was in a lift for 10 minutes because it stuck when I was a little girl.
My brother,
grandma.
my brother shoved me in a cupboard and locked the door, and I was in there for 5 minutes.
Yeah, it's usually a sibling or a friend that locks you in somewhere thinking it's funny, or maybe you're in a toilet cubicle and the door comes a little bit stuck and you have to fight with it a little bit to get it open, but in that moment of panic you think that you're stuck. So we always say to somebody, but you've never been stuck, and they look really confused at us, and we say, well, we know that because you're here today. So what you actually need to do is start by changing your terminology. You weren't stuck, you were potentially inconvenienced.
Or delayed.
So that's the first step, and to realise that actually, what do small spaces do? So my question to you is, when you're in a car, what does that shell do, that small space, what does it do? And the answer, I hope, that you're considering is that it actually protects you, because that's exactly what small spaces do.
And do the same thing with a plane.
Yep, plane, train, car, lift, these are all areas of protection. You don't get stuck, you may get inconvenienced or slightly delayed. Again, incredibly rare, and now we live in a world where most of us have got mobile phones, so even with a mobile phone you can make
if you
a
got
call.
inconvenience, you can just ring someone and say, oh, inconvenience, come and help me out.
If this was because of a brother or a sister, for example, who was teasing you, then the question is, what did the small space do? That small space is as much a victim as you are, because potentially if we're saying that a brother or a sister locked you in somewhere, you were the victim of your brother or sister, not the small space. But the small space is also a victim now, because you have blamed the small space for making you feel bad, when the small space didn't do anything, it just was there.
But small spaces keep you safe, without question. And I just want you to consider that before you were born, you spent 9 months of your life in the smallest possible space on the planet. And what did that do for you?
Why
it
were you there?
nurtured you, kept you alive, allowed you to be born.
So I hope that helps. It's just about changing your perspective, and do make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, because there will be a film coming very soon specifically about claustrophobia.
Chloe on Facebook says, I have a massive phobia of eating for 10 years. It wasn't as bad at the start, but as I've got older it's got worse. The fear of trying new foods frightens me, as it causes my throat to flare up. I get phlegm in my throat and I feel like I can't breathe. Apparently no doctor has heard about this before, as it's not in the NHS yet, but have you heard of ARFID before? Okay, so ARFID is in the NHS. I actually know because we wrote about it in our book, Winning at Weight Loss. And ARFID actually...
I think one thing to point out here is that when doctors qualify, and obviously at medical school for many, many years, from that point, their learning is quite limited, because
with regards to phobias and things,
so just because your doctor doesn't know about that, it doesn't mean that your doctor is a bad doctor, or it's not out there. It's just that we only know certain things, and he might specialise in a different particular area.
And ARFID's definitely on the NHS website, because I remember researching it myself for our book. So that's the first thing. So I hope that offers you some reassurance, Chloe. With regards to the fact that you said you feel that you can't breathe and your throat tightens, those are all symptoms of anxiety. So all that is a symptom of the food and eating the food. So the question is, what happened 10 years ago? You said it was about 10 years ago, so that's what you need to look at. That is your pinpoint, what you need to pinpoint. You need to find out what was happening 10 years ago, because that's when you said it started. So you've got to kind of consider, how old was I then? Was I in a relationship, for example, where I would get laughed at for eating? Or did you eat something and it gets stuck in your throat for a moment? So you've got to understand that first. And then once you understand that, that's what you then need to unpick. Because what I know is that if you can eat any food, which you obviously can, then your swallowing mechanism has never let you down. Food's never let you down, but potentially a third party that made you feel bad did. And it's that needs to be addressed and resolved.
Essentially, if you can eat any food, you can also eat all food.
Yep.
So look at that. But the way to finding this out is to construct a timeline. And we have a film just on how to do that on our channel. So maybe take a look at that and then set some time aside where you can start thinking about what was going on 10 years ago, and hopefully you'll find clues which will allow you to overcome this.
That kind of leads on to, we had a question from Emily Jane on Instagram who said, how do you get over a phobia if you can't find the origin? I'm really struggling.
Oh, right.
Kind of links what you just said.
Okay, so yeah, Emily Jane, again, we've got a film about it. It's about writing a timeline. So have a look at the film here on our YouTube channel, complete a timeline. Now, you might think, I have no idea how this started, but one thing on your timeline could be the start. So many people have events in their life and they don't realise that then goes on to create the phobia that they've got today. So you might not have put two and two together. Do you know the origin of your phobia, of your anxiety, whatever it might be? Absolutely, yes, you do. You just don't realise that it was that event that started it. So best way forward is complete a timeline. Again, have a look on the YouTube channel for that.
So Sandra on Facebook says she has a phobia of water because she was pushed in a swimming bath when she was 5 years old. I'm now 60. This fear has stayed with me all my life. When I have a shower or my hair washed, I have to stand backwards. The fear is so bad. I'd love to learn to swim, but until I've controlled my fear of water, I can't. Have you got any advice?
Well, Sandra, we've worked with the fear of water so many times, and usually in similar situations. What I'd like you to consider is water has done nothing to you at all. Ever. When you got pushed into the swimming baths, it was somebody that pushed you. It wasn't the water. The water didn't do anything. And we've had so many people. We worked with a lady on this morning actually who she had a swimming instructor who held her underwater so she could get used to being underwater. And obviously that then caused a phobia, similar situation. And we actually worked with Paul McCartney's stepmom, as it happens, out in LA, and she had this phobia for, what was it, 80 years?
83 years.
83 years. And hers was based on the fact she was running down the beach and her brother had dug a hole in the sand. It got full of water and she fell in that. So it's similar circumstances. What you need to do to help you get over this is realise that the water was never at fault. You know, just consider as an analogy, it was a fire. Fires don't do anything either, but if someone pushes you into fire, you will get burned. And you potentially could blame the fire. In this way, you're blaming the water, but the water wasn't to blame. It was the person that pushed you in. So if you want to learn to swim right now, then please be aware that you are, as an adult, totally and utterly in charge, and no one's going to push you in water as an adult. You're in charge. You can learn to swim in your own time, and that person that pushed you in, that little boy who's probably grown up now and might not even be in this country anymore, he's not going to be around to push you in again.
The question is, who actually made you feel bad in that moment? Had he not pushed you in, would you have felt bad? No, you wouldn't.
No.
So it's actually him that you should actually have a phobia for.
That's right.
And don't forget, you're only 5, so you're only little. So the water was a lot deeper or taller than you, whereas now as an adult you can stand on the floor, on the ground of that pool, and like Nick said, you're the one that's in control. You can stay in the shallow end, so don't blame the water for something that it never did.
Take it gradually.
Yeah.
So Gemma on Facebook says she's got a phobia of cotton wool to the point she has panic attacks and hyperventilates. She said, only last week the dentist forgot, even though it's all over my notes, to clear the room, and he went to use it while in the middle of having a fill-in, and I jumped up. I don't know where it's come from, but I've been like it for over 30 years. Please can you tell me how to overcome my fear? What would be my first step? Do
you know what? I've got to say that when we've ever dealt with the phobia of cotton wool, it's usually started at the dentist that happens.
Yep, it has. And that is because you're in a heightened state, because you've probably had a tooth taken out and they've used one of those cotton wool kind of rolly things that they like roll it up and make you bite on it. So,
yeah, but it's not. Just consider that, because again, the way to get over this is to look at when did it start, and the best way to find out when it started was to make a timeline. As I say, it might not be the dentist, but that's usually the area that I would look at. So look at, early in your life when you were a child, you went to the dentist, maybe you had teeth out, it was a frightening experience, and you blamed the cotton wool.
Yeah, and make light of it. And what we mean by that is that if you can't be in two places at once, so we've got on one end of the scale, we've got fear and anxiety and panic and worry, and then on the other we've got fun and laughter. So you can actually start to dilute your feelings towards your phobia if you can start pulling it to the side of fun and laughter. And so literally consider questions like, that'll make you smile, like, well, you know, I've never picked a newspaper up and seen man attacked by cotton wool, for example.
Yeah, I've not seen that either.
No, neither have I. Because that then helps you to realise that the cotton wool's actually really innocent in all this, and it was how it felt to you because of, like Nick said, maybe probably because you were at the dentist. And then you've got to question yourself, well, and what was it used for, and did it help? Its job was to soak up probably some blood. It did its job. It never let you down. What felt bad was the procedure and not the cotton wool.
And no one's ever been attacked by cotton wool, as Eva said. Never seen it in the paper, never seen it on the news. So cotton wool isn't out to get you. It's just you've got to change your perspective on it. And doing a timeline, finding when it started is a good starting point.
Sue on Facebook says, how many times do you need to keep reinforcing the positive evidence against your phobia?
Sue, once you get over phobia, that's it. Because essentially, a phobia is a belief that an object or thing is going to hurt you, which is why your fight or flight mechanism kicks in to protect you against it. Once you believe that that thing can't do you any harm, it's not going to hurt you, once that belief changes, it's changed.
Yeah.
The
only thing I would say is that what then happens is that you then have to build up a bit of confidence with that.
Well, only through evidence.
Exactly. So the thing with a phobia is that's an attachment to the fight or flight response, where you will get a shot of adrenaline that will then give you all those feelings of your heart beating faster, hyperventilating, feeling hot, feeling sweaty, feeling you need to go to the toilet, over breathing, feeling faint potentially. And that's all because of your fight or flight response. Once you no longer believe it's a danger, you sever that link to the fight or flight response. However, it might be that you've never had any experience. You see, what we always say is that if you've had a phobia from being really tiny, then you've got nothing to go back to. Whereas if, say, for example, you get a phobia when you're 15, then you've had 15 years of life of normality. Now, so you'll probably tend to find that the transition post-phobia treatment is quicker if you've had some references. If not, it's kind of about just building your confidence up. So phobia's gone, but you might still be a little bit apprehensive until you go, and that apprehension is only based on, I'm not really familiar with this, and then you just get more evidence, and then you just stop even noticing it.
So Mummy to Abby on Twitter says, I have a needle phobia and I'm a nurse. I can give injections, but come near me with a needle and I go sweaty, faint, and my heart starts racing, I cry, etc. It's ridiculous. I've tried to rationalise it. I relate it back to a painful vaccination I had when I was about 3 or 4 years old, but nothing works.
There you go.
That's such an interesting one, and it's one that I don't think I've heard before, where if you're frightened of needles, you're frightened of needles. But it's interesting that you're a nurse and you can actually give injections.
Yeah, definitely. So the question is, and you've kind of answered, you're nearly there, because you've answered the question yourself in that you said that you had an injection when you were little and it was particularly painful. So knowing, as a nurse, knowing that there are ways that you can give an injection, what you've got to ask yourself is, go back to that moment when you were 3 or 4, go back to that memory and consider what actually made that situation painful. Because as you know, you can give an injection to somebody and it'd be fairly painless, other than you can feel a scratch, but that's pretty much it. So what I think you're actually saying is that the person that administered your injection hurt you.
Wasn't as good as you.
But it wasn't the injection.
Yeah.
It was the way it was administered. And therefore, what you should actually avoid is not having injections. Just avoid the person that gave you that injection back then, because they were the ones that were heavy-handed. It wasn't the injection's fault.
And because you can have an injection that's like you don't even feel, but sometimes you do feel it, what I'd like you to also consider is if you give someone an injection and it hurts, because it can do sometimes, what would you say to them? What do you say to that person in that situation? How do you reassure them? And you know from your evidence that that's few and far between. Most injections you just can't feel.
Now what you could do is imagine that little you and imagine yourself as grown-up nurse giving that little you the most pleasant experience with an injection, so that little you can actually see an injection for what it's supposed to be like, so that it stops hindering you in the future. Hope that makes sense.
Denise on Facebook says, could you give any advice on how to cope with having my blood pressure taken without having sleepless nights and panic attacks? I took my blood pressure last November at home to check my mum's machine was working, and it was dangerously high, so I had to make an urgent GP appointment. Since then, I can't bear the feeling or noise from the machine. I've tried relaxing, deep breathing, listening to calming music, but nothing helps. Are there any other techniques you can recommend?
I'm sorry, what was the name?
Denise.
That was Denise.
Denise, do you know what? You should be thanking.
I was just going to say,
yeah,
you got it wrong,
you
Denise.
use your mum's blood pressure machine to find out that
Thank
you had high
goodness.
blood pressure. Wow,
Yeah,
that could have saved your life.
Absolutely. As soon as I just heard that, then I was thinking, how amazing that that machine potentially saved your life. You could have carried on not knowing about the fact that you had high blood pressure.
But I do understand, in the moment, you trying your mum's machine, the shock that your blood pressure was so
Dangerously
high,
high, you say.
and the fear that you could have had of what that might have led to, has put you in that heightened state. And in that moment, you thought, well, I don't want to feel like this. I don't want this to happen again. And you blamed the machine.
Yeah.
But actually, it's the complete contrary. The machine, Denise, saved your life.
Yeah, so what we'd now like you to do is just to consider that memory again and say thank you, because that machine is actually what has stopped and prevented your blood pressure from being dangerously high. So go back to that memory, look at it all again, and just think and say thank you.
Kim on Facebook says, what type of therapist would you recommend for a phobia of animals?
Kim, what I would recommend is I would find the local the therapist in your area, and I would ring them up, and I'd ring more than one up, and I would ask them, can I ask you a question? How many times have you cured someone with a phobia of animals? And the one who maybe said, oh yeah, I cure that every week, I'm doing that all the time, or the one that you get on with the most is the one that I would go and see. Because it's amazing how many people who've had a phobia and they've gone to see therapists and they've not got over the phobia, but never once have they considered asking that therapist, oh, how many times have you cured this?
Yeah, and there's all sorts of different therapies out there, but probably talking therapy like CBT, psychotherapy, that will probably be one of the most effective.
But sometimes hypnotherapy can work as well for phobia of animals.
Okay, so last question. Hairy McFairy on Instagram says...
Nice name, Hairy McFairy.
Yeah.
What if a phobia is because something did do something wrong? I have a phobia of edges, balconies, fences and curbs, but not heights. A fence broke when I was 7 and I fell down Mount Snowdon. I was okay, just bruises. But I've listened and watched you cure a lot of phobias, and in all cases the thing the person is scared of didn't actually do anything wrong. But in my case it did, because the fence broke. So my question is, how do you deal with that when the thing that happened did do something wrong?
Well,
so interesting.
And I feel a bit odd referring to you as Aaron McFairy, but we don't know your name, so let's go with that. You know, again, I'm seeing that in an entirely different way to the way that you see it.
As am I.
Because I'm thinking, thank goodness for that fence, because if that fence wasn't there, you could have been seriously injured.
Yeah, and the fence was man-made, so the fence was there and did what it was supposed to do. The fence didn't do anything wrong. The fence didn't come and grab you and push you over or push you down. Then it would have been to blame. I get that. Then you should fear it, and then something has gone wrong. But the fence was there, and it was doing exactly what it's supposed to do. But the manufacturer or whoever's supposed to maintain that fence hadn't done so, and therefore it was weak. But what it did do was, like Nick said, it stopped you. It actually stopped you, and you were falling. So it actually helped to break your fall. Imagine if you'd have gone full pelt. In any event, that actually stopped and broke your fall. So it wasn't the fence's fault. The fence did nothing wrong. It didn't come out, it didn't find you, it didn't grab you, it didn't push you down. The fence was there, and the manufacturer or the person that was supposed to maintain it, they're the one that let you down.
And you said that this has gone from fences to curbs and other things, which it will do, because, you know, in a bid to keep you safe, your brain will overgeneralise to keep you safe, as a, you know, so it doesn't get it wrong, and undergeneralises and puts you in danger. So this has gone into other areas of your life. But what I want you to consider, this all started off with you falling, right? Nothing else. It started with you falling. But just remember, when you were a child and you were learning to walk, you fell and you fell and you fell, but you got up and you carried on walking. And this is good with the same thing. You've got to accept that, look, I fell on Mount Snowdon. You know, I understand, fortunately, that fence broke my fall and essentially stopped me being, you know, because seriously injured.
Only.
Yeah, stopped me being seriously injured. And I should be thankful to that fence. I should be thankful to
I'd
curbs.
be feeling sorry for
yeah.
it as well. I mean, literally, I'd be feeling so sorry for that.
Hey, who
poor
got broken
fence.
that day?
Exactly. You only got a few bruises. That poor fence got
Yeah.
totally broken. So I think you've been a bit harsh on the fence, Harry McFairy.
Hopefully, when you look at it with a different perspective, that will help.
Yeah.
And, you know, but please do let us know.
Yeah.
Drop us a message
Yeah.
below once you've seen this
Yeah.
and let us know if it's
Just remember, our thoughts create our feelings. And if your thoughts are inaccurate and based on where you feel you need to be protected, then your feelings will be sort of associated by trying to protect you. So if you change your thoughts, and all we've done today with the examples given is helping people or helping you to see things for what they were and not how they might have felt back then. Do take a look around our YouTube channel. We've got loads of films to help, and we're going to be putting loads more on with specific phobias. Take a look at our book, Conquering Anxiety. We cover all sorts of different conditions from fears and phobias, our process, our approach, and our podcast, Making the Change. Have a listen because we cover phobias and anxiety on there too. Hope our films helped. Our first Q&A.
Yeah, that went pretty well,
Yeah.
I think. Hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much.